Hi, it's July 2020 and my name is Fatina Hardy and I'm sitting here with Rebecca Lim and we're continuing our discussion about the work that Rebecca's doing and has been doing with people who have been seeking asylum and refuge. The title of the series is called Australia's Immigration Policy, the Manus Story 2013 to 2020. So, Rebecca, it would be really great if you could tell us a little bit about the men. The people that you've been supporting, who are they?
Yeah, hello, Fatina. Thank you for having me back. The refugee population who were transferred to Manus Island in Papua New Guinea from after July 2013, and they were transferred from Christmas Island, and they come from refugee hosting and refugee producing countries. So we're talking about Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Sri Lanka, Burma. We've also had people from Lebanon, from Vietnam, Nepal, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, just to name some of the countries. And I guess only men were sent to Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. And some of the stories that they have told me was that for some of them, if they had refused to agree to be sent to Manus Island, they could have been deported to their home country, in Sri Lanka in particular. Because Australia and Sri Lanka has an agreement that if people don't meet the convention, they can be sent back, involuntarily sent back.
What would have been the problem with that? Can you explain?
The problem with that is Sri Lanka continues to perpetrate human rights abuses on its citizens and anyone who's against the Sri Lankan government. I suppose the Tamil community is a minority community, but it's not just Tamils that are being persecuted. You have the majority Sinhalese, lawyers, human rights workers, even clergy or anyone who's seemed to be anti-government, who gets into a lot of strife. And the situation now, according to many human rights and credible reports, is that the situation in Sri Lanka has deteriorated. And I guess we can address that a little bit later as well for the refugee population who are in Australia, who are subject to the fast-track assessment. So from what the men have told me, what was happening was, they get told they'll be sent offshore. Generally families were sent to Nauru, some single people, but only men, single men, and they're single for all intents and purposes. They came here by themselves. It doesn't mean that they're single in the home country. So they were sent to Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. A local person of influence on Manus once told me that the reason Manus was chosen is because Manus is one of the safest provinces in Papua New Guinea. So it was chosen. It's quite a strategic place anyway in terms of naval base. So what the men were telling me was, they would be taken onto a plane, generally, 322 or 33, and then they would be in the middle, and then they have two security guards kind of on either side of them. On the plane, they couldn't even, when they went to the toilet, they couldn't lock the door. This is what the men have reported. They were told in advance that when you get to Papua New Guinea, be very careful because the Papua New Guineans, they are cannibals. They are known to eat people. They're also very dirty, so wash your hands after you shake hands with them, and it's best not to engage with them. And conversely, the Manus Islanders, after I got to know them because of my work, which we'll talk about later, were then told the men who were being transferred from Australia to Manus Island are potentially terrorists. You've got to be frightened of them. Don't engage with them. Who knows, maybe they could make bombs and blow us all up. So the men were telling me that it seems there is a deliberate policy of them and us, kind of not to build bridges and not to get to know each other, which I guess played out a little bit when Lone Broom, which is a naval base where the men were held for some years, when the gates to Lone Broom were opened because of the PNG Supreme Court decision that found it was unconstitutional to detain the men, and the men were then released into the community, into transit centres, into Lorengau, which is the capital of Manus. And there was a lot of fear in the community. And so we had lots of reports of violence towards the men, not because the Manus people were generally violent, but I think there was a lot of fear and unknown. And this is what, I guess, resulted from the them and us.
And when the men first got there, like after being told that, they were cannibals and all of that kind of stuff, what did the men say to you about how they felt about interacting with the local people?
Well, there was no really opportunity to interact with them because they were kind of held in locked detention, as we can now call it, I suppose, in Lone Broom. But I guess a few of them told me when they landed in Momoti Airport, which is the airport on Manus Island, they were quite shocked because don't forget, some of them come from very developed countries. They're middle class, but they're here because they've been speaking out. I mean, they're refugees or they're claiming asylum because they've been speaking out against the government. So I guess to fly into a remote place that many didn't even know where Papua New Guinea was, and conversely, in the Manus Islanders, people didn't even know where Afghanistan or Sri Lanka or any of those countries were. So it's a lot of unknown. Who are you? You look so different. They're foreigners. So they were really quite shocked. They were frightened. But then it plays out later that, there was a lot of goodwill in the Manus community and towards the men. So a typical journey, for the refugee would be, if you can get a visa, you fly into Australia and then you might claim for asylum. And basically, Australia is a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention. So we have a responsibility, and it's our international obligation, to assess claims when people come through the airport. People who have arrived by boat have not been able to apply for a visa, which is why they flee their home country. And I've mentioned the populations, the countries where they come from. And it could be a reason of religious persecution. Some people are stateless, so it's based on nationality. Race is another, you might be a minority race. For example, the Tamils nationality, Rohingyas are stateless. You have religious persecution, as I mentioned before, and also political persecution. There's another group where we call membership of particular social group, and that could be somebody who sexual orientation is kind of not accepted, of a different sexual orientation is not accepted in your home country, you're persecuted on those grounds. So that's kind of the 5 grounds on which people will seek protection. So if you can't get a visa to fly in, you would then, wherever you kind of land, there are some boats that come directly from India or Sri Lanka. Some people might spend 5 days on a boat journey. Some people might spend 30 days. If your engine's broken down, you have to kind of fix the engine. Some people are lucky, only spend 3-4 days. And really, it's a bit of a risky journey. I guess, there's always a risk you're going to drown. But people make that rational choice and the rational decision to take the boat journey if there's no other way to escape.
So it sounds like taking the journey by boat is like the last, that's the only option they've got left.
I mean, that's right. If you had another option to seek refuge safely, why would you choose a dangerous boat journey? And in some countries, well, this is something that the men have told me, in our country of Sri Lanka, for example, the government knows what we're doing. They facilitate our boat journey from certain exit points to the country. So it's not like people do it without the government's knowledge anyhow. So I guess if you have to flee, you have to flee. Sometimes it's difficulty to get passports, travel documents. So if that's, how you have to move, that's how you have to move very quickly. Most people do have their identity documents. So it's also, it'd be interesting if the government kind of says, we don't know who you are. Well, then provide us the evidence and tell us, how many people have not arrived with documents and you don't know who they are. In this day and age of governments talking to each other, it's quite difficult to kind of figure out that, you don't know who somebody is if you can just send a photograph and Interpol and, that kind of security checks.
So do you think that there's some misinformation to the public about being able to identify people?
I just think that if people come by boat, you can have a reception center, for 7 days or, very, very minimal kind of security detention and just, give people an opportunity to kind of say who they are and then give people a bridging visa and then they can kind of be in the community. But with our policy of mandatory detention for people who arrive by boat and indefinite detention really for some, for any, they're really at the mercy of the government. I could spend 1 month in detention or I could spend 10 years in detention. Yeah, it's not difficult to kind of figure out who people are. But I think the system also makes people very frightened about what do I say, what do I not say. If I say something, are they going to reject me outright? Because, we also know that some boats who have come and with Sri Lankan, Sinhalese and Tamil, people have been interviewed on water, right? So they get interviewed while they're still on the boat, get interviewed, and they kind of, this is under enhanced screening policy that was applied only to Sri Lankan asylum seekers. And if you ask a couple of questions, why you're here, and if you don't kind of articulate your claim of persecution or fear of being sent back, you don't even get an opportunity to lodge an application. That's what really started getting me involved with the Sri Lankan because of this enhanced screening policy. So people were screened out very, very quickly. And the onus was on you to provide the information to get screened back in. And being screened back in means you had an opportunity to lodge an application.
And why were the Sri Lankans targeted in that way?
Good question. Let's ask the government, why pick on Sri Lankans? Yeah, it's a geopolitical arrangement between Australia and Sri Lanka, I guess. There's also this attitude that all the Sri Lankans are economic migrants, and therefore, the war is over, and why would anyone even want to be here except probably to work and earn money? And, there's just no acceptance. I'm not saying that everyone is frightened to go back. I'm saying a large proportion of people do fear persecution if they are sent back. So it's interesting why that enhanced screening policy was only applied to the Sri Lankans.
And it's interesting that it was done in such a way that the men themselves would not have access to any kind of representation in the middle of the boat.
Exactly. So immigration just ask you a couple of questions. Or, not just everyone interview on the boat. Some people get the boats to Christmas Island, and you were screened out there as well. In my visit to Sri Lanka in 2015, I met two brothers. They were not brothers, they were friends, and they were screened out. And so I interviewed them in the confines of a church with an interpreter, and they told me that they were screened out. And I said, what did you say? Well, I did say that my brother's in jail, but they said, oh, well, the chances of you being in jail are very low, so you've got no claim, so they sent him back. And then I met another person as well who was sent back. So it's not uncommon, put it that way.
Did they have, and I'm using inverted commas to say legitimate claims to seek asylum?
It's all about articulating your claims. If you say, so why are you here, you're asked, and you say, I want a better life, which could mean a whole heap of things. For this gentleman, it could be, I don't want to end up in prison like my brother, so I want a better life. But you need to say safety, peaceful, I want to be alive, I fear for my life. You've got to articulate those claims. People don't know how to say these things. Everyone should have an opportunity to lodge an application. This is international law.
And so when you say, so for people who don't know, okay, so if you're saying that person does not want to end up in jail, is that because they would go down the path of being a criminal, or is that because they would actually end up in jail just because of who they were?
Yeah, and ending up in jail is kind of not about criminality. Ending up in jail is about political persecution. So we're talking about the minority Tamils who come from a certain part of Sri Lanka, who have a history of, being discriminated and persecuted for a long time. So for them, it's about, my brother has been in jail because he's kind of spoken out against the government, that kind of thing. We can always weed out the criminals. We do that. If it's a land dispute or you've raped someone or you've murdered someone, that can always be weeded out. But the fact remains that if you've come to Australia, whether you've walked across the borders, which we don't have because we're an island, but if you come by boat or you've got a visa to fly in, there you have a legal right to make an application, not be weeded out and not to be screened in and screened out and go through that horrible process of uncertainty and then being told in Christmas Island, well, if you don't agree to go to Manus, you're going to send you back. And the Tamils themselves know, and the Sinhalese people, they know how many people were sent back. 1,500 people were sent back over the duration of the enhanced policy screening at the time the boats were arriving. That's my understanding from reading some figures somewhere.
It sounds like the policy, or the way that the policy then was enacted or implemented, actually failed to adhere to the rights that people need in terms of legal representation, which I'm sure is actually in the convention.
Yeah, that's our understanding. So is the enhanced policy even legally sound? Who knows? We have to ask the government that. So the other gripe that the men really have is, so I was chosen to go, I was told I had to go to Manus, and then a family has to go to Nauru. So if there's 30 of us in the same boat, 5 families go to Nauru, 15 men go to Manus, and everyone else gets to stay in Christmas Island or come to Australia. So the men don't even understand how they were selected, in inverted commas, for offshore detention. It's not even processing anymore. It's become detention, right? 7 years entering 8th year. There's no kind of resolution for everyone. Some people are resettled, many others are not. So we need to ask this question again one fine day. How were people kind of selected? You go offshore, you stay onshore. And this is the biggest pain for many men. They have friends or people they know on the same boat who have been in Australia while they have been languishing away offshore.
That would be so cruel for the men.
It is. It's heartbreaking because they can't understand why they were picked on. Why am I different? The other question that I will kind of want to ask too is that we know that, after you have your first entry interview in Christmas Island, if you're an experienced immigration officer, you will kind of know if somebody comes from a particular country, if they were in a particular jail at a particular time, that they would have been tortured. So it would be interesting to find out at some stage whether people with everyone's kind of got trauma, right? But anyone with previous torture experience and high degree of trauma, were they then sent offshore, knowing it's a developing country with healthcare that's really not up to Australian standard. So what have we done? We've kind of sent people there who already have pre-existing some medical conditions. As we know, I've spoken to many, many men who've got heart problems before, were diabetic, had a whole heap of different chronic illnesses, and who were still sent offshore. So what responsibility does Australia take at that point to decide who goes where?
It's incredibly problematic, isn't it? I'm just a little bit shocked, I have to say, because it's incredibly problematic to think that there was a policy that would willingly re-traumatise people and place them somewhere where they're not going to be able to access the services that they needed.
Indeed. Time for a royal commission.
Indeed. Rebecca, I would absolutely agree. I wonder if that's a good place to end this part of the conversation, and then we can continue with our next discussion and talk further about the men generally and Manus.
Yes, thank you, Fatina. We'll talk again.